All right, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the museums in Washington, D.C. And kind of like we talked about before with the National Mall, the museum centers are, for the most part, most of the museums are over here in this section of the mall. Now, not all of them are on the mall. You can see a couple of them up here that don't actually make it on the mall, but many of them are over here on this museum side, just like they set up in the plan for DC. So they wanted this to be a real center for a lot of the things that people wanted to go and see when they came to visit Washington, D.C. So as you can see, there's a lot of museums right here, and there's also a lot of stuff over here as well. So I'm going to kind of give you a little brief tour of the stuff on the mall. So on the mall and off the mall, actually. But if you can look here, these are kind of the museums that you're going to see in what we're going to talk about. We have the American Indian Museum, the Air and Space Museum. Just so you know, our hotel would have been right about there. That's usually right where we stay. This is an art and sculpture museum. There's an arts and industry museum, an African art museum, the Sackler Museum, the Freer Museum, and we have the art gallery, you have the Smithsonian Castle, you have Natural History Museum, American History Museum, and African History Museum. So there's a lot of things on the mall to see. The nice thing and the cool thing about that is that it's all really close together. So you have a chance to see all sorts of different things. So these are just a lot of different maps that have the stuff we're going to see on them. So, and as you can see, when we zoom out of downtown, there's so much here, and it's not all contained on the mall, but much of it is. Okay, so one of the largest groups of museums here in Washington, D.C. is the Smithsonian Museum, and it was founded by a man named James Smithson. Hence Smithsonian. So James Smithson, when he died, he left all of his money in his will to the United States to found in Washington the Smithsonian Institution. And it was to increase knowledge of people. So that was the big goal. He wanted to increase knowledge, which is why museums are the thing that the Smithsonian Institution does. So they have a bunch of museums. A total of 19 museums and galleries, and they also have the zoo and in Washington, D.C., which we'll talk about as well. But so that's kind of they have a ton of them. They have everything from arts to science to culture and everything. So it's pretty amazing. Here are the museums that are here in Washington, D.C. There's a ton of them. We're going to go through them all. And that's the Smithsonian logo. So the first one we're going to talk about is the African American Museum. And we use, just so you know, when you see this little asterisk down at the bottom, that means that is a Smithsonian museum. So some of these on here are not going to be Smithsonian museums, but if you do see that little asterisk there, that means it is a Smithsonian museum. And this is one of the most recent museums to open. I believe it opened in 2016. So, and for each museum, I have kind of a snippet of what you can see there. There is so much to see in each museum. The Smithsonian Museum in general, the institution, they have not only the things in the museum, but they also have a ton of stuff in storage. So, what they have isn't even everything that you see in the museum. So some of the stuff that they have, they take off of exhibit and then put on at other times. So these are some of the things that you can see at this museum, at the African American Museum. So some of the famous things that they have here, they have Harriet Tubman Shaw, they have Chuck Berry's Cadillac, they have Oprah Winfrey's studio couch. They have Black Lives Matter posters. They have a slave cabin from South Carolina, and they even have the Emancipation Proclamation. So tons of stuff to see here. And then this is just sort of a collection, like a visual collection of what they have there as well. And if you want to check out any one of these museums, on each one of these slides, I have a link to that museum. So it takes you to that website. So if you're interested in checking out more about any of these museums, just go to the actual slideshow and you can check them out. Okay, the next one is the National Museum of African Art. This is what the outside looks like. And again, here are some of the artifacts that they have there. Some of the art exhibits that they have there, they're entitled things like Heroes, Principles of African Greatness, I Am, Contemporary Women Artists of Africa, Visionary, which is Viewpoints of African Arts, and Currents, Water and African Art. So they have lots of different exhibitions there at the museum, and this is just a sampler of some of the things that they have. The Air and Space Museum. This is a museum that's actually right in front of the hotel that we stay in. And this has this really cool thing in the front, this big spire with, it almost looks like stars at the top. So this is what the outside of the museum looks like. On the inside, there are all sorts of things in here. When you go to the gift shop, you can even buy astronaut food. If you are interested in checking out what the inside of this museum looks like, if you watch the movie In the Night at the Museum, the part 2 one, the one at the Smithsonian, you can actually see the inside of this museum. They'd go all the way through it. But some cool things that you would find here are items from the Wright brothers, Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, lots of things from the space program, and a lot of space equipment, helmets and suits and things like that. They're best known for rare and historical things that tell the story of the history of air and space. They have a ton of stuff. They have everything from like full-size actual airplanes and aircrafts to small things. So it's a really cool museum. The next one is the American Art Museum. So this is what the outside looks like. And the American Art Museum has all sorts of different types of art in it. It has everything from 19th and 20th century art, so art from a little while ago, to contemporary art. It also has sculpture, photography, and folk art. So it has a lot of different types of art in here. And that's just a sampler of some of the things that they have. The American History Museum, it tends to be one of my favorite ones to go to because it has so many really cool things in it. And let me show you what it has in it. A lot of things that they have, some of them people would consider like a pop culture sort of an exhibit. They have some historical stuff there too. They have the actual Star Spangled Banner in there, which is gigantic, and you get to go through it, go through this darkened room because they don't want it to, the light to destroy it at all. So they have that. They also have small things that you can see that are, things that people have worn in parts of American history. You have the ruby slippers from Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. We have Muhammad Ali's gloves and robe. They also have things that are, other clothing that they do have. They have a whole exhibit on the First Ladies of the United States. So they have lots of dresses and things from the First Ladies. They have things from movies. So stuff from like Star Wars and all sorts of different stuff. They also have Thomas Jefferson's desk, which is right here. Here are the ruby slippers. And then they have, this is Thomas Edison's light bulb. They also have some things that are set up as though they were back in the day that it was actually happening. So we have things like Julia Child's kitchen. There is also the Greensboro lunch counter from the Civil Rights Movement. So there's some really cool exhibits here that aren't your typical museum where you're looking at artifacts that seem like the things that they've been dug up from the ground, or old pictures and old paintings. This tends to be a lot of people's favorite place to go because they have a lot of cool stuff like that. All right, another one is the American Indian Museum. It has really cool architecture on the inside. Another cool fact about this museum is that it's cafeteria area, its restaurant area, is really, really cool. It is called and I'm going to mispronounce this, Mitsutom Native Foods Cafe. And Mitsutom translates into let's eat in the language of the Delaware. And they have all sorts of really Native American inspired food. So that's a really cool place to go grab some lunch sometimes when you're there. Other than the food, which is wonderful, they also have some amazing and incredibly beautiful artifacts here too. They have sometimes some of their stuff, there spans from like 12,000 years ago, and then some things are a little more modern. They have collections from groups from the plains, plateaus, southwest, northwest coast. They have some things that are old, like with archaeology and ancient artifacts, but then they have other things as well. They have artifacts from people in what we would think of as the United States, but they also have artifacts from people from Canada, Middle and South America, as well as the Caribbean. So there are tons and tons of artifacts here to explore. Another museum is called the Arts and Industry Museum. Now this one is it has I personally have never been into it. It has a lot of photographs and things like that, but it also, one thing that is pretty cool outside of it, it has a working carousel that's outside of it, that you can ride, and they usually have an ice cream stand out there too. So but it does have a lot of really wonderful, beautiful photographs of arts and industry. The National Gallery of Art. Oops. So the National Gallery of Art has a ton of really cool stuff in it. It has famous artists like Botticelli, Michelangelo, Van Gogh, and Monet. So you can come here and explore some pretty traditional and beautiful paintings. The Freer Gallery of Art is another art museum. And here, some of the highlights that they have Chinese paintings, Indian sculpture, Islamic paintings, and metalware, as well as Japanese lacquer, and Korean ceramics, and American art from the 19th century. So there's a lot of really eclectic art here from all over the world. It's beautiful. This is the building of this. I always love it. And so this is called the Hershorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. So there is a museum with lots of art inside, but then it also has a sculpture garden as well. There are a lot of famous artists in here, names like Picasso, Matisse, Cassatt, all sorts of, and Edward Hopper, all sorts of amazing artists that you can find in here. But also in the sculpture garden, there are beautiful sculptures out there. There's even a wishing tree, where people can write their wishes down and hang them on the tree. So really cool stuff inside this museum too. The outside is beautiful as well. Another one of my favorites is the Natural History Museum. And inside the Natural History Museum, there's a lot of very cool things as well. They have one of the things, true to my heart in Cincinnati here, we have Martha, who is the last known passenger pigeon who died in the Cincinnati Zoo. So Cincinnati Zoo had the last passenger pigeon known on Earth. And so if you go to the Cincinnati Zoo, there's a building and a sculpture of Martha, our last passenger pigeon. But they actually, in this museum in DC, they actually have her body that they've stuffed and they've preserved it so that you can see the actual passenger pigeon. Other very cool things in here, there's the Hope Diamond, which is up here, and that's in the gems in the gems section of, they have lots of different exhibits throughout this museum. The Hall of Geology, Gems and Minerals, is that where you would find that. They also have a Hall of Human Origins, which talks about ancient cultures. They have a whole hall of dinosaurs and paleontology, so you can find things like dinosaur bones and things there. They have a hall of mammals, which shows lots of different mammals. They have an insect area. They have an ocean area. They have a section called African Voices. They have butterflies and plants. And there are just so many different sections of this museum to explore. It's a fantastic place to go. This is the Sackler Museum. So this is the front of the Sackler Museum. And inside there are all sorts of interesting art, sculptures, and pieces of art from all over the world and from different timelines. You have ancient sculptures from Jordan, Korean arts from the 18th century, contemporary porcelain from Japan, and then they also have an exhibit that's called Yoga, the Transformation of Art. So really interesting art pieces here. This is the Smithsonian Institute building. It's called the Castle. Informally, technically, the name is the Smithsonian Institute building. If you've watched the Night at the Museum movie, they feature this building in it as well. This building isn't as much of a museum as the rest of it. It does have some pieces in it, but for the most part, it has offices and things like that in it. It does have a visitor center. It has some interactive displays and maps, but there's not a ton of stuff in the way of museum artifacts in this one. Okay, so that's the stuff that's on the mall. There are also a lot of amazing museums off the mall. This is the National Portrait Gallery. It is part of the Smithsonian, even though it's not on the mall. This is a really cool place. It's one of my favorite places to go to. They have some amazing art in here. You can see that some of them are older pieces of art. Like, this one is a really older piece of art, but then you have some more modern ones, like there's Kurt Cobain and Marilyn Monroe and Jackie Kennedy, all sorts of different things that some are much older pieces and some are much newer pieces. Um, they have a considerable amount of artwork in here. They have some that are permanent exhibits, so they're there all the time, and then some that cycle in and out with other exhibits. So we have 21st century Americans, or sorry, 20th century Americans. And then, so like you have Jimi Hendrix and you have Kurt Cobain and Marilyn Monroe, things like that, Madonna. They have a thing called American Origins. And then one of the ones that I really like is called American Presidents. So this is a permanent exhibit of American presidents. And inside there is a portrait of every single president. So if you're interested in exploring this, there's a link up here. And they have a portrait of every single president that's been president of the US throughout this exhibit. It's a fascinating and beautiful exhibit. This is the National Postal Museum. Yes, there is a museum about the Postal Service. And inside, there are all sorts of different things. There are 3 vintage mail planes. There's a stagecoach that was used in the Pony Express. There's a postal truck. There are all sorts of different things. There's a very large stamp collection. You can create your own virtual stamp collection. Check out some historical letters. Some cool things that they have in there. They do have a section about the Pony Express, which was the first way that we got mail, and then go into the use of railroads and things like that. One cool thing they do have is John Lennon's childhood stamp collection. John Lennon was a member of the Beatles, so they have his stamp collection there. But as you can see, they have a lot of stamps. Some are more modern, things that, seem like something from today, and then you have some really older ones. So they have a very wide variety of stamps. This is the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and this is another space where we've talked about parts of history that are hard to talk about and often sad, but we need to talk about them and learn about them so that things never happen again. And there's actually a sign on the front that says never again. So the Holocaust Museum has a lot of really interesting artifacts, but also stories to be told. There are a couple of different ways you can explore this museum. They do have a more of an adult section, and then they do have a more of a children's section, and children is kind of an interesting way to say it. It's not for all children. They say that it's recommended for ages 8 and up. This is a really tough topic to talk about. And so there's a lot of things that can be sensitive to younger people. So they have a children's section, which is recommended for children 8 and older. But then the permanent exhibit, that's more the adult one, has some things in it that still would probably be upsetting to children. So there are a couple of different ways to explore it, and you learn a lot about the whole Holocaust and all of the things that were involved in it. So it's a really interesting museum. It's very a lot of the content in it's really hard to see and really hard to hear about, but it's important to learn about it so that it never happens again. This one is really cool. This is the International Spy Museum, and it is all about spies. It's amazing. You get to go in here and you go into what they call the briefing center, and in the briefing center you get an identity of a spy, and you go through this museum as this spy and things like that. So they do have a lot of artifacts, just like other museums as well. They have things that go all the way back to Greek and Roman empires. They go Middle Ages and Renaissance, and then they get a little bit more modern into the British Empire, American Revolution, Civil War, and then they get into the 1900s with the World Wars, the Cold War and things like that, and all the way through present day. So it's really cool. This tends to be a fan favorite when we go to DC. Everyone really enjoys the Spy Museum. So that is the end of my tour. So these are all the museums, and they are fascinating. Every one is different than the next. Even though there are a bunch of art museums, each art museum shows a different kind of art and interesting art, whether it's sculpture or art from different places. It's amazing. And then each other museum shows an interesting little nook of the world to learn about. So everything from natural history to the Spy Museum to the African American Museum, the American Indian Museum, the Air and Space Museum. There's so much to learn here in fun ways, and ways to see actual firsthand artifacts. So I hope that you enjoyed my museums in DC tour. And again, if you want to check out any of these museums in more depth, on each page on here, there is a link that you can explore. Let me just remind you and show you where they are. So right next to the collection, there's a link, and you can click on that if you want to go to that museum. And this is actually a screen clipping from that website, and so you can click on that and see. If you click on any one of these little thumbnails, you can explore that item, and then they have more items as well. Okay, so thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.